everyone. Welcome to my podcast. This podcast is discussing all things Ukraine. I live in Ukraine and I have a very exciting guest with me today. She is a fellow Brit, which makes this extra exciting for me. This is Felicity Spector. She is a TV journalist and a food blogger, and has spent quite a lot of time in Ukraine. And she's also written a book about her experiences in Ukraine. So very much looking forward to learning more. Felicity, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's really great.
Great. And to start with, can you explain a little bit about how you got involved in Ukraine initially and how this connection started?
So, I mean, I've got a long-standing friend here in England called Olia Hercules, who's a well-known cookbook writer and chef who's from the Kherson region. And so I've known Olia for like 10 years or something. And immediately the full-scale invasion started, Olia and her friend Odesa started a kind of fundraising. Well, initially, Olia was just fundraising for her brother who joined the territorial defence. And then she tried to widen it out and just started this initiative called Cook for Ukraine, where people could raise money by doing supper clubs, by having bake sales, by putting a donation tab in a restaurant and so on. And it raised, we had done a similar initiative for Syrian refugees. And so this one was modelled on that, and it raised absolutely phenomenal amounts of money. But I wanted to do something on a bit more practical as well. And I had been in touch with a small bakery in Kyiv and found out that their warehouse had been bombed and they'd lost all their resources, all their spare equipment and ingredients and so on. And I know a lot of people through my sort of contacts in food, because I have a foodie Instagram. I thought, well, I'll just ask around and see if anyone's got any spare industrial mixers and, you know, some that they're not using anymore. And within 48 hours, everything on the list from this bakery that they needed, people had offered to give. So we organised a small convoy of 4 trucks that took all this stuff to Kyiv in, I think it was June 22, something like that, in the summer. And we drove from London to Kyiv with all this stuff. And then I got in touch through that. I just somehow on Instagram found this wonderful small non-profit in Odesa called Bake for Ukraine, run by a group of young, well, they're not, I call them young, people who used to work together for many years in a company that supplied restaurants and hotels with sort of kitchenware and so on. And they all decided that they could support small bakeries who were donating free bread to people, displaced people or anyone in need, basically. So they found a load of small bakeries who were making, primarily ones that were making sourdough bread, because we wanted to also promote that, the traditional Ukrainian palyanitsa bread. And we had started giving them, or they'd been giving them monthly donations and also finding sourcing equipment or whatever they needed. So I then went to meet the girls in Odesa and then tried to travel around to as many of these small bakeries as I could. We had one in Mykolaiv, Bucha, Kharkiv, one in Kyiv, a wonderful, wonderful bakery in Kyiv you may have come across called Good Bread. And they are a social enterprise, inclusive bakery that employ people with mental disabilities. And they existed long before the war to try and give people with disabilities a path into work, and also to normalise attitudes, because it was very old-fashioned in the sort of Soviet attitudes. We'd lock them up in a mental institution and kind of thing. So Vlad, the young man who runs it, wanted to just show that they're, you know, great people and you can just interact normally and have like a regular, you know, friendship with people just because they have Down syndrome. It doesn't make them into something you have to be frightened of. So it's a really lovely place, and they have an art therapy place, and they also make bread. So it's been really great to meet up with them, and I've been on some trips with them as well to the east to deliver that bread. Because as I started meeting more and more people, I just was really inspired by what they were doing, and the fact that Ukrainians, I know you've pointed this out, but they sort of just regularly volunteer and give up, you know, vast amounts of their spare time and money and just don't think twice about it. You know, they just it's a really incredible effort.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think I've experienced that as well, just how, especially if there's, of course now it's the war effort, but also just if someone's having a hard time, someone needs help, the way that people just kind of gather around and just without it being a big thing or a big show or anything, but people really just want to help each other. I think it's quite amazing.
Yeah, and the fact that they take, I mean, like some of the people I went to the East. The first trip I did was with, there's a pop group called Anti-Tila, and they have a charity that they've been running since 2014. But and three of the band members had joined the armed forces at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and they had joined this territorial defence battalion. And then after they left and went back to the band, they wanted to sort of support that unit and a number of other ones. So they were doing these sort of, bringing them equipment, radios and computers and whatever, stuff and drone jammers and whatever they needed. And I sort of got in touch with the drummer, Dimitro, the young man who sort of runs that operation. And I was just so impressed by, he's just like a young guy as a drummer, now he's running this very complicated logistics to sort of deliver stuff to 10 different military units at different points. And they would drive, he would find a driver or two drivers, and then they would load up the van with all the stuff and then start at Sloviansk or Liman or somewhere, and then there's a big main road that goes down through Kramatorsk and ends up at Pokrovsk, which then obviously wasn't as terrible as it is now. Sadly, what's happening now, it's made that very difficult. But they had this whole route, and then they would meet these units. Some representatives would come to the side of the road at a bus stop or something, and they would hand over the stuff. The guys from the army would give them some sort of signed books or some signed flag or whatever that they could then raffle to raise more money. So they had like a whole exchange going on.
It's amazing. It's amazing how it's like, in a way, you think of wars must be chaos and everything's going on around, and it is kind of chaos, but they have this organization. They're able to organize things between themselves, and suddenly it's a whole system without a system kind of thing.
And it's very grassroots. It's not the UN and it's not the World Food. Those, you never see them anywhere. You see their boxes of stuff being delivered by other people, but they, they're not primarily the ones. I mean, on the ground, it's just regular
people. Yeah.
Can I break off to go and look after some dough? I'm also rashly trying to make another attempt at this Ukrainian Easter bread, Pasca, and I've yesterday's. It was nearly there, but I've been told I didn't proof it for long enough, so I thought I'll start earlier today and see what happens. Anyway, I've also been told it's a really hard bread to make, and why you don't make it. So leave it to the experts. Anyway, I'm going to try. I mean, one.
Yeah, that's fine. You just okay. I'm going to go in a second. You're back.
I am back. Yes, hopefully the bread is going to rise.
And bread is always one. It's always touch and go, especially if it's the first time you're trying to make it. You never know.
Exactly, and it's always something which my Ukrainian friends have, made since they were 5 years old or something, and their grannies have taught them. And so, yeah, they're like, oh, but it's really easy, it's something you have in your blood or whatever.
I always feel so stupid when I'm with Ukrainians, because they're talking about their food, and then I ask them how to make it. And they don't give a full recipe. They just do this and this and this, and just kind of roughly explain. And I'm sitting there okay, I have no idea how this is gonna go. I need a clear instructions, but that's not how it works.
But one of my friends, so one of the guys so what I did for the book was try and meet up with different groups of people, or find people who had really interesting stories in food. And one of the groups was this a couple of they have a catering business, so the chefs and the manager of it, and they had been, since the start of the war pretty much, they started making this packs of dried food that soldiers could pour hot water on, and they did really good quality ones, really fancy, tom yum soup and spaghetti carbonara and stuff. And they just seemed really, and then every so often they would collect enough money to actually drive down to close to the front line and cook for the soldiers. They would sort of set up a little mobile cafe, and they said, well, they can't go to a restaurant, I'll bring it to them. And so I travelled with them on one of their trips, and they made this amazing borscht. And I said to Alexei, I said, God, you must have given me the recipe. And he goes, there is no recipe, we just know it. I was like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. I'm also a big, my jumper says borscht on it. I'm a huge fan of borscht. I actually made borscht 2 nights ago. I made borscht. Okay. It's probably one of the only Ukrainian food, meals that I feel confident making. And if I give it to Ukrainians, they also say it's good. So I feel like that is quite an accomplishment. But I wanted to ask you, when the first, like your first impressions of Ukraine, when you was it during the full-scale invasion, the first time you came to Ukraine?
I mean, the very first time, I can't even remember where we went because it was in 1991. I used to be.
Okay.
I'm so old. I was the Moscow producer for ITN when I pretty much just after I joined, really. At the end of we started going at the end of 1990. When the whole thing was sort of starting to collapse and the coup happened and so on, and we did a big documentary about the fall of the Soviet Union. And then when Ukraine was declared, they had this sort of, when they all went independent in 91. I remember we went to Minsk. There was a big sort of signing ceremony of this group with Kravchuk and so on, and then we drove around for a bit, and we did come into Ukraine a bit because I remember seeing the signs for the Chernobyl zone and so on. But it was a long time ago, so I can't say exactly where we went. And I kept meaning to go to Kyiv. My grandparents came from Dnipro. And I'm not. They died a long time before I was born. It was then called Yekaterinoslav. But I wanted to visit and see where they'd come from and so on. And I never sort of, when you think, oh, I'll go next year and so on. And some other relatives of mine lived in Kyiv for a while in the 90s. Anyway, yeah, and sadly, I never managed to make it. And then when the first time I properly went was when we took that convoy in the summer of 22. And we were always nervous about, oh my gosh, we're only going to Kyiv, but of course, you hit, and there were loads more sort of the block posts and so on. And when we arrived, it took ages to get across the border because there were so many lorries and stuff with things in. And we were really nervous about, what would happen with the curfew and would we get to the hotel in time? Because no one was around. It was absolutely fine.
Yeah.
And people were so immediately so kind. And, we were so sort of, I guess pleasantly surprised by how hospitable everybody was. Like immediately, this hotel we finally arrived at about 11:30 at night, and the ladies there immediately started rooting around, and they sort of rustled up some kind of meal. They found some vareniki and sort of heated it all up, and buckwheat and so on, and it was like almost midnight, and they were like, "Oh no, of course, you've been driving," and and that was our very first impression, and it was so positive. It was really, really nice. And then
That's really cool.
yeah, Kyiv was just it's an amazing place. So we managed to spend a couple of days sort of having a bit of a trip round everywhere and see as many, go to the cathedrals and see there's the glass walkway and the sort of archway thing and so on. So yeah, we tried to see if some of the kind of sights of Kyiv as much as we could.
During a full-scale invasion.
Yeah. Not that we were trying to be tourists, but it was just, you just think, oh, this place is amazing. It's just so fantastic views and just like what a beautiful place. And then it's just, and then the curfew was about 10 o'clock, I think, at that point. So everything sort of shut down fairly early. And it was, they painted over all the road signs and everything. And there were lots of sort of, signs of what was, the war and so on. It was, and you just sort of felt, that it was the fact that people could still be so welcoming and friendly, and we're so, people would come up and say, "Oh, England, great," Boris Johnson or something.
Yeah.
And it was like a really, oh God, no, we should be thanking you, and they were like, no, we should be thanking you, and it was just, it was a very, very positive sort of, considering the kind of amount of stress and horrible experiences that they'd had. You just think, blimey,
Yeah, it's this really strange kind of contrast in all these horrible things happening, and yet people are still, they haven't lost like their humanity. Like I think it could easily just, everyone goes crazy and gets angry, and it would be completely understandable considering the amount of pressure and stress that people are under.
Yeah, and just having their loved ones in the armed forces, or having to move house. Like the friends I stay with, some friends in Kyiv, and they were originally in Kharkiv, and they moved away at the beginning of the full-scale war because it was just horrific there. It was horrible. And my friend's parents moved abroad, and I've been back to Kharkiv with her, and there was one time we went back, and she gave me a lift to the train station because I was going back on the train, and she suddenly said, "Oh, I haven't been here since that night that we had to flee the city, and there were like thousands of people in here." And I found my mum a place on the floor so she could sit down, and my dad stood up all night holding the cat and everything. And I was like, crikey. And she was suddenly sort of like reminiscing.
Flashback, yeah.
Obviously slightly blocked it out because it must have been absolutely horrendous. And they would have to sort of just hope that they could cram onto a train to leave and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, the first, I was in Ukraine during when the war, full-scale invasion broke out. And the first, I think, month, even 2 months, you're in this like state of shock, even though where we live, so I live in Ismail, Odesa region, so there was we did get rockets, at least one rocket that landed quite near us, but we weren't in, as you know, it wasn't like a constant daily thing that as it was in other places. But even so, those first few months, just that state of not knowing, and the news is every second you're getting new information, what's happening. Like we were waiting to see tanks rolling past our window. Like you just had it was just, and you completely couldn't think, you couldn't do anything. You were just kind of frozen.
Yeah.
It was really, really bizarre, and it was a crazy experience after a few months, and then things, I would say, stabilize. It doesn't really stabilize, but at least I guess you got used to it, and you got used to that feeling of stress. You just kind of adapted. You know, humans were good at adapting, I guess, and just kind of carried on. But did you find that because I mean, obviously you're older than I am. Don't take offense. But but did you find, like, before, because at least when I moved to here, I found that before the war, or before the full-scale invasion, there was very little information about what Ukraine really is like, and it made it feel like a very distant place, and kind of maybe a scary place, or a unsafe place to travel to. Did you find that as well, that before the full-scale invasion there wasn't as much information, or about, I'm sure you could find it if you really looked for it, but just in English, about Ukraine as a country?
I guess so. I mean, I suppose because I had my relations who lived there, so I knew, and I had travelled a lot to other former Soviet republics. I suppose my sister-in-law lives in Lithuania, and Olia was running. So Olia Hercules had a cooking holidays with a friend that she used to run to Kakhovka, where she comes from in Kherson region, and I remember really wanting to go, and it was the COVID time, so they had to stop them and so on. And then they decided to put one on in 2021 in the autumn. And I remember she was looking for, like, she said, we've got a couple of places left, it would be really amazing. And I really wanted to go, but it was like I couldn't get the time off work, and it was all that hassle in COVID times. You had to organise all these nonsense injections, all that, and I just thought, oh, this sounds stressful, and then I couldn't. It was just tough to get the time off, so I didn't go, and I really regret that now, because obviously it would have been amazing. And now you can't. That whole area is still occupied, sadly, and Olia's home is, I think, Russian soldiers took it over, and God knows what's happened to it. Horrible. So, and it looks from the photographs that she has from those times, or from when she was growing up there, it looks like it was such an amazing place. And she's actually writing, or she's got a book that's coming out in June, which is all about her family history over the last 100 years. So it's looking at a whole history of Ukraine through the eyes of her family. So I think books like that will really help people to understand Ukrainian history, and the fact that it's got this really old and vibrant culture that nobody really knew about. Because obviously the trouble is with I did what was, as part of my, I did PPE for my degree at Oxford, and part of it was Soviet and East European studies, but it was heavily Russian dominated. And the problem with a lot of universities that teach sort of, Russian and East European, or Slavic, or whatever they want to call it, studies, is that all the curriculums and stuff were written when all people thought about was Russian literature and Russian art and so on. And I think that now they're starting to the academics obviously have been lobbying to change that, and to say, look, hang on, there's half of these things weren't even Russian to begin with. They just sort of took them over.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of incredible art and literature and history that in all of these other places, which was completely squashed. And now what we really want to teach is that, and to show people that there's a lot more to that part of the world, and that they have their own histories and identities.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot of I mean, I personally, I don't think anything good comes out of like a war. But if you were to say, if you had to find something positive about a war, then it definitely would be that all of that, yeah, the all of this history that's been kind of hidden, or people have been trying to kind of wipe away, suddenly people are taking a lot more interest in it, and people are, yeah, it's coming more to the forefront of what people are talking about, what people are interested in, and they want to know. And it's really interesting to hear. I mean, even just my husband's Ukrainian, and his family history, just to experience what his parents, grandparents, and great grandparents have experienced. It is, I mean, absolutely phenomenal, the different things they've had to go through in their lives. It's right, whole lives about it.
I mean, my parents were, I mean, they're old enough, but they passed away now, sadly. But my mum was evacuated. She lived in East London when the Second World War started, so they were evacuated at age 10 until 16, and they lived in some, who knows where. And my dad was in the Air Force, and so they had that whole experience that they went through. That he had 6 years in the Air Force during the war, and my mum was living with another random family, and then in a dormitory things, and. But that now seems so far away that nobody in our generation, the current generation, could imagine that ever happened in England. But obviously in Ukraine, I don't know, the generational trauma from the Holodomor and so on seems to have been passed down far more strongly, and people have a really deep understanding of what their family history is and what their family went through, which I think has been very valuable now in terms of like forming that national identity.
Yeah, that's true, actually. I think in general, just families, and like that, yeah, the value of families is really something that's important to Ukrainians, at least the people who I've met. When I first got engaged to my husband, we were talking, and I was like, oh, my mum said this, like being a bit annoyed. And he looked at me and was like, I would never say that about my mum. She was like, my mum's the best person in the world. Like, she's, like they just have like a huge respect, and they love their families. And of course, I love my mum as well, don't get me wrong. But just that, like, yeah, that how much they value. And I guess maybe it is just a respect of their history and the experience that they've had. So yeah. And okay, last little question then. Your book.
Yeah, it still seems I should have had a copy ready to kind of.
Yeah, that's okay. So is it out now, or is it coming out soon?
It comes out in a couple of weeks, so it'll be out in the beginning of May.
Okay.
And that basically, I think it was all inspired. I went the trip I made with Dimitro and the Anti-Tila charity. We had this really long drive all the way through Donetsk region. Basically, we had some very rudimentary accommodation on the first night, which we arrived about 2 a.m. in a very spooky forest near Liman. Not unsettling at all. Very kindly, these we were offered this place to sleep, and everything was nice and perfectly comfortable. But then that's quite a long journey then, from all the way up there all the way down through all this main highway down through Kramatorsk and Konstantinivka and Druzhkivka and then Pokrovsk. And there was nowhere to stop really, apart from to do these deliveries. And they had planned to stop at a gas station to kind of, have some coffee and go to the loo and things. And it had been bombed that morning, I think, or anyway, there was a big hole in the ground, and the gas station was definitely closed while they were trying to repair everything. And anyway, I was slightly like, there wasn't anywhere to go to the loo for about 12 hours, which was an interesting experience. But we finally got to the Dimitri kept promising me. He said, "Oh, there's a place you're going to really like, and our final destination. It's this volunteer kitchen. You're going to really like it." And anyway, this lady was incredible, Natalia, who ran this kitchen. So on the road near Pavlohrad, just inside Dnipropetrovsk region. And she had this incredible, huge sort of dining table with chairs up either side, with room for sort of dozens of people. And all day long, buses would stop with either soldiers coming or going, or people coming or going from the hospital, volunteers, and anyone could come in and just eat for free. And this whole table was sort of laden with amazing food. And there was no electricity. She had everything carrying on. She was like with wood stoves and pots of soup and like amazing salads and meat and so on. It was absolutely incredible. And it's still going. She's still every day producing, day long, free to anyone who comes by. And I just thought, what an amazing lady. And she just sort of just took it all on. And she has got this roster of volunteers. And I said, are any of them professional cooks? And she said, no, they are Ukrainian housewives, so they can turn their hand to anything. Okay. And yeah, I just thought this woman's story is amazing, because like she had a little tiny cafe and a produce shop and so on before the full-scale invasion, and her son had joined the army, and he managed to come past one day quite soon after the thing everything started, and she sort of rushed out with some soup that she'd made, and everyone else was like, oh, have you got any more of that? And she suddenly thought, actually, these lads, it'd be really nice to give them a hot meal. And it just sort of grew from there. And I just thought that kind of story, there were so many of them, and you could sort of find somebody like that in doing all sorts of things, delivering food to really dangerous areas. The people I went with from Good Bread, the volunteers, they're just regular, guys who at the weekend put a flak jacket on and drive to, somewhere in Donetsk region, 5 miles from the Russian lines to take bread to people who otherwise wouldn't have it. So I just thought, this is incredible effort, and nobody, you wouldn't imagine that people would carry on doing that week after week. I mean, it's quite scary doing it once, going to somewhere like that. And they just kind of, there was one bloke called Dima, amazing guy, and he just was smiling all the time, and he knew all the old ladies. He'd sort of jump out, oh, how are you, how's your dog, hug them, and he was just constantly smiling. And it was this terrible, horrible place, and really difficult driving over these these roads with massive holes in them, and that it'd been cut through a field because the other one was bombed or something. And he was just like, oh, I'll just take a little selfie, hi, here we're delivering bread, and I just thought, what an incredible guy. He's now in this, but there's more people like him who are still doing that. And I just really wanted to sort of, and also just the stories of ordinary businesses. So I went to Kherson and to Kharkiv to see people who are still running, and in Kharkiv, in fact, people are opening food businesses all the time, in restaurants and cafes and so on, because there are still people living there. And I spoke to this guy, Dima, who has some coffee shops called Makers, really nice coffee shops. He has one in Izium. He had one in Kupiansk until quite recently, when everything was evacuated. But he said it takes a certain kind of person who stayed in Kharkiv. He said people have come back, which is great, but some people just stayed, like him. He's got a 2-year-old child. He just thought, we're staying. And he said, so I wanted to try and, give them a nice place to come if they're going to, be living here. You can't just, be living in your basement the whole time. People have come out and want to just have as normal a life as they can, given the extremely difficult conditions. And coffee is always welcome. So yeah, he's built these coffee shops and just put one in Izium again, because there's not a lot there for people. There are more places now starting to open, but it's it's a really creditable effort. I think that I can't imagine how difficult it is, because it's really hard to run the food business at the best of times in a normal economy without facing all the challenges of a war at the same time, and having to deal with all that stress. And his windows have been broken several times by rockets landing nearby or drones, and customers have rallied round and raised money for new windows and helped sweep up and nail up. So it's like a community effort. People have come together because they love the place that he runs, and so I guess that gives him the encouragement to keep going.
It's amazing. It is amazing how so many, what Ukrainians themselves are doing, and how they manage to carry on, not give up, and just keep finding these ways to volunteer, or to do their part, right? Do what they can. I think a lot of time in international media, it's a lot of the focus is on what other countries are doing for Ukraine, which is, of course, is also great. But what Ukrainians are doing themselves is also a phenomenal effort. I think that your book is going to be so interesting to read and learn some of these stories about just ordinary people and how they're contributing.
Exactly. And the culture as well. So it ends with some of the chefs who are sort of cooking Ukrainian food as a way of sort of sharing the culture, and it's a good gateway in. If people sort of want to try vareniki or something, and they're like, oh, this is nice. I thought, oh, they just ate cabbage or something. There are all these stereotypes, aren't there, around East European food? I know British food has its own stereotypes, but everyone thinks they just go around eating like a potato and cabbage. I mean, obviously there is very nice potato and cabbage dishes, but there's a lot more.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And especially Ukraine, like their food, they love their food, and they have such amazing food, and it's very different to British food, but it's
There is a chapter on Bessarabia actually, because that was one of the places I first went. And my friend Maria should be really the honorary ambassador for Bessarabia, because she promotes it constantly to me. And she's also writing a cookbook actually about Odesan food, which has its own amazing history and a huge cultural diversity. But yeah, but Bessarabia, obviously, there's so many amazing sort of wineries, and there are small farms and like these incredible small producers, honey and cheese, and all sorts of things. And it was absolutely zero tourism there now, of course. So I don't know how they keep going. And again, they're sort of hoping that they can just sort of manage until things get better. And the quality of the produce is absolutely fantastic.
Oh yeah, the food here is amazing. After my mum came to visit me and she ate tomatoes here, and she said she went back to England and she went to like the little farm shops, the all organic. She found the most expensive tomatoes because she just wanted to have that taste again, but
Yeah,
she could not find it. Like the food here is absolutely amazing.
exactly. I mean, I remember I went to there's a food market in the center of Kherson, and there weren't many people obviously selling stuff there, but I found a lady selling some cheese and cream and things like that, dairy products and stuff. And I bought a little bit of brinza and some obviously rajinka, and it was absolutely amazing. It was so delicious, and crikey, even here they just have this amazing quality, and
Yeah.
where it must be one of the most difficult places to live now. It's horrible, but yeah, I hope I'm having met people. You just sort of constantly worry and sort of try and message every so often and check in with people. And I can imagine that for Ukrainians having to, just you can never sort of, it's weighing down on you, isn't it, all the time, that you constantly sort of hear about something and then you've got to check that your friends or relations are okay. And it's a lot to, even if you're living in the west of Ukraine or something, it never sort of leaves you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's the same also for those that Ukrainians that have had to move to a different country. I
Yeah.
think it's in many ways it's not easier.
Yeah.
It's definitely not easier for them because they're not there, but they're part of them are still there, right? And their families and people they
Yeah.
know, and it's
Yeah. But hopefully, I mean, one can just, who knows, the future is like, people keep asking me what I think is going to happen, and I'm like, oh gosh, if I knew, I would, no, nobody knows. It's like you just have to take a day at a time.
Yeah, one
Yeah.
day at a time and see
Yeah.
how things pan out.
But there's a new Ukrainian restaurant that just opened here in London, with Bessarabian food. So they have a few restaurants in Ukraine, and this is their first one outside London. And so I'm really excited that people will be able to try all these dishes now and sort of get excited about them. So
Amazing. Next time I visit home, I'm going to have to. What was the name of the restaurant?
Tatabuna. There's a village called Tatabunari in somewhere in the Odesa region, which is where Felix Cooper, who's the restaurateur, his family come from there originally. And there is a Tatabuna restaurant in Odessa as well, so this is like a similar vibe. But yeah, all the crockery is made in Ukraine, all the wood has come from Ukraine, so they brought everything over. So it's absolutely beautiful inside. So hopefully, it was very, very full yesterday, which was nice to see. So hopefully it'll carry on being a success.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I'll have to come visit.
Yeah.
See you next time I'm there. All right, Felicity, thank you very much for this conversation. It was really, really nice. And I will meet you in person when you're over next time.
Definitely. Well, I'll give you I'll let you know when we're coming towards Ismail, and we can even, so the cafe, well, we bought the mobile bakery for Bake for Ukraine from a bakery owner in Ismail. So he has a small bakery and he'd had it for years. He wasn't really using it, so he was happy to sell it to us. So we're very grateful to Vlad for selling us the bakery, because now that's working away in Mykolaiv and making bread for Kherson region every day. So it's been very,
That's great. All right, thank you then.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a quiet night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.